The speed of surrender. Introduction. Imagine being tasked with speaking at the absolute zenith of human vocal velocity. Not merely rapid, but impossibly swift, faster than the very currents of cognition. Your mind would churn, a frantic engine striving to keep pace. You'd feel a visceral jolt of energy, a primal imperative to attempt. Yet, herein lies the curious paradox. The very act of striving for such velocity would render it unattainable. The more vehemently you push, the slower you inevitably become. It is akin to endeavoring to capture mist with your bare hands. Why, then, does this seemingly elementary act, this fundamental capacity for vocalization, suddenly become so profoundly arduous? What unseen force exerts its constraint, causing you to falter precisely when you aspire to soar? This sensation, this exquisite tension between the desire for swiftness and the grip of impedance, extends far beyond mere elocution. It permeates every facet of our existence. Recall a moment when you yearned to articulate an idea, to decisively commit, or simply to express yourself with unburdened fluidity. You perceived that surge of latent potential, that nascent spark of what lay within your grasp. But then an interruption occurred, a flicker of hesitation, a pregnant pause, a palpable sense of immobility. This is the experience of encountering an internal impediment, an unseen speed bump. These are the invisible bulwarks that separate our authentic capabilities from their outward manifestation. They are constructed from the bedrock of self-doubt, the chilling apprehension of judgment, the crushing weight of perfectionism, and that persistent, insidious inner monologue. These are not external adversaries. They are deeply embedded within the architecture of our own minds, obstructing the natural, unforced unfolding of our potential. At the core of these internal encumbrances resides what we may term mental filtering. Conceive of it as your personal, ever-vigilant internal censor, perpetually scrutinizing every nascent thought, every incipient utterance, every intended action, before it has the opportunity for release. It is the intricate process by which you appraise what you are poised to convey or perform, posing the silent interrogations. Is this truly adequate? What will be their perception if I voice this? Is this the prescribed methodology? This filtering mechanism, frequently fueled by an acute fear of censure or a profound lack of self-assurance, functions as a heavy drag upon our inherent velocity. It is the progenitor of tangled thoughts and hesitant actions. It is the very agent that arrests the unimpeded flow of our natural aptitude, shackled by the pressure to perform, or the yearning for approbation. But what if a pathway existed to dismantle these filters? What if the solution lay not in intensified effort, but in judicious release? This is the province of surrender. In this context, surrender is not synonymous with capitulation. It is not an embrace of passivity or weakness. Rather, it is a potent, deliberate choice. It is the precise counterpoint to mental filtering. It signifies the relinquishing of the imperative to govern every conceivable outcome. It entails the shedding of the onerous burden of performance anxiety. It means stepping away from the relentless pursuit of external validation. Surrender is an act of profound trust in our own inherent faculties and instincts. It is the allowance for our natural processes to unfurl without the intrusive interference of our critical intellect. When we surrender, we cultivate the fertile ground for our authentic potential to blossom. As we embrace surrender, a remarkable transformation ensues. The internal barriers begin to recede. The ceaseless tide of self-recrimination subsides. We commence to experience the unimpeded current of our innate abilities. Our expressions become fluid and genuine. We gain access to elevated echelons of performance and creativity, achieving states previously deemed unattainable. This is the gateway to discovering the velocity that transcends mere thought, the effortless grace that arises from profound presence and uninhibited being. This volume serves as your compass, guiding you toward the liberation of that latent power. We shall meticulously dissect the intricate mechanisms of mental filtering, apprehend its manifold manifestations, and, most crucially, acquire practical methodologies for cultivating the practice of surrender. It is a pilgrimage toward quieting that internal critic and allowing your inherent brilliance to radiate forth. Are you prepared to embrace the speed that lies beyond the confines of thought? Let us embark. Chapter 1. The Art of Letting Go. 1. Speaking without a filter. Every individual possesses an inner voice, a constant companion that whispers or sometimes bellows within the confines of our minds. This internal interlocutor can become a formidable obstacle, particularly when we aim for swift or impactful articulation, effectively acting as a sentinel that intercepts our nascent thoughts before they reach our lips. This phenomenon is what we term mental filtering. Consider the scenario: an idea surfaces, poised for utterance. The words begin to coalesce, only to be met by the intrusive questioning of that inner voice. Is this the precise phrasing? It probes. Will I appear foolish? Is this too simplistic, or conversely overly complex? This relentless judge scrutinizes every potential utterance, comparing it against an idealized construct of what ought to be expressed, perpetually concerned with external perception. This incessant scrutiny and self-interrogation constitute mental filtering, an internal mechanism striving for an elusive standard of linguistic perfection. While a degree of this filtering is innately beneficial, serving to avert truly inappropriate or hurtful pronouncements, it transforms into a significant impediment when the objective is spontaneous, rapid expression. It is akin to attempting to sprint with a heavy net draped over one's form, each movement hampered, each thought ensnared and meticulously examined before it can progress. The primary architect of this filtering process is the inner critic, a construct often forged in the crucible of past experiences marked by judgment or embarrassment. It embodies the voice of perfectionism, a persistent whisper that any deviation from flawlessness equates to failure, and the voice of fear, heralding catastrophic consequences for perceived mistakes. Consequently, under duress to speak with alacrity, wit, or persuasive power, this inner critic escalates its vigilance ostensibly to safeguard us from the dreaded specter of judgment. Ironically, this protective impulse invariably curtails our capacity for fluid and rapid speech. This paradoxically leads to a curious outcome. The more we endeavor to accelerate our speech, the more we amplify this filtering mechanism. Our heightened awareness of the imperative for speed and impressiveness compels us to overanalyze each word, transforming us into our own most severe adjudicator, a process that inevitably decelerates our output to a glacial pace. Imagine the act of catching a ball. In excessive focus on the correct method of apprehension, the precise hand positioning will likely result in a missed catch. Conversely, a reactive, instinctual response, allowing ingrained motor skills to engage, ensures success. Speech, in many instances, operates on a similar principle. Unfettered conversation, characterized by relaxation and natural rapport, typically flows without this internal censor. Ideas emerge organically, unburdened by the need for sentence-by-sentence analysis. Minor stumbles or awkward phrasings are inconsequential, as the primary objective of connection and communication remains paramount. However, when the spotlight intensifies, when the perceived demand for performance arises, this natural current is invariably disrupted. The pressure to achieve perfection, to exhibit eloquence and quick-wittedness, tightens our grip on the reins of expression, and the tighter the grip, the less control we ultimately exert. The fundamental key to liberation from this constraint lies in what we term surrender. This is not an abdication of responsibility or a descent into apathy. Rather, it is an active, deliberate choice to disengage from the mental filtering process. It signifies a conscious decision to cease the internal conflict with the inner critic and to instead embrace the inherent rhythm of one's own mind and body. It is an act of faith, an acceptance of the possibility of speaking at a velocity that transcends the deliberate pace of conscious, critical thought. This entails relinquishing the compulsion for perceived coolness and the perpetual anxiety regarding external opinions. These are the very fetters that bind our uninhibited expression. When we cease striving for external validation and grant ourselves permission for momentary imperfection, a subtle yet profound transformation occurs. The inner critic begins to recede, and the gatekeeper steps aside. Recall a moment of complete absorption in an activity you cherish, perhaps playing music, painting, or engaging in a profoundly stimulating conversation. In such instances, self-evaluation and concern for others' perceptions vanish. You are simply doing. Your hands move, your voice speaks, your mind creates, all unhindered by the judgmental inner voice. This is the essence of unfiltered flow, a direct conduit from intent to action, a manifestation of innate ability unburdened by self-doubt. This represents the very core of achieving peak spontaneous expression. It is not about acquiring novel techniques for accelerated speech, but rather about dismantling the internal impediments that obstruct that unimpeded flow of existing capabilities. By surrendering the need to filter, we empower our minds and bodies to operate at their natural, uninhibited cadence, a pace often far exceeding that which our conscious, analytical faculties can manage. The practice of cultivating this state commences in low-stakes environments. Dedicate a few minutes each day to journaling, allowing words to flow onto the page without concern for grammatical precision, spelling, or even absolute coherence. Should the impulse to edit or judge arise, simply acknowledge it and continue writing, thereby practicing the art of relinquishing the filter. Another beneficial exercise involves speaking aloud to oneself, narrating one's actions, observations, or thoughts. Again, eschew eloquence. Simply speak. This practice fosters comfort with the unmediated expression of one's own voice. A profound understanding of the deep-seated nature of self-judgment and the yearning for external approval reveals how these elements actively fortify the mental filter. Each pause to question the adequacy or acceptance of our words reinforces this internal sensor, much like a muscle strengthens with repeated use. The fear of judgment and apprehension regarding others' reactions serve as the very scaffolding of our internal sensor, fostering a belief that unvetted expression is inherently perilous. The intricate mechanisms at play when the inner critic interrupts speech involve a complex interplay. Under pressure, our nervous system heightens its alert state, paradoxically increasing self-awareness and, consequently, the propensity for filtering. Our brain, programmed for self-preservation, interprets social pressure as a potential threat, activating regions responsible for self-monitoring and evaluation, thereby impeding the communication pathway. Normally, thoughts traverse rapidly from conception to linguistic formulation. However, the critic introduces a delay, creating a veritable traffic jam on the highway of thought. Surrendering to the process bypasses these mechanisms, not by ignoring the congestion, but by selecting a more direct, expedited route. By consciously choosing to cease filtering, we effectively communicate to our brain, it is permissible. I trust my own capabilities. Constant monitoring is not requisite at this juncture. This can mitigate the nervous system's heightened state, fostering a more fluid connection between thought and expression, predicated on the confidence that our innate communicative prowess is sufficient, even without the incessant oversight of our critical mind. Beyond the realm of rapid articulation, the implications of this principle of speaking without a filter extend profoundly into our quotidian interactions. When the preoccupation with meticulously crafting every utterance diminishes, we become more present, attentive listeners, and more authentic responders, fostering genuine connection. The act shifts from performance to true communication, leading to stronger relationships, enhanced understanding, and a greater sense of ease. In social contexts, it is about being perceived and heard for our genuine selves rather than a carefully curated persona. Envision a conversation devoid of the constant anxiety of uttering the correct phrase. This freedom allows for greater openness, vulnerability, and honesty, cultivating trust and intimacy, the difference between a rehearsed monologue and a heartfelt exchange. While both have their place, the latter invariably yields deeper bonds and more meaningful interactions. Thus, we have observed how the mental filter, propelled by the inner critic and the fear of judgment, impedes our capacity for natural speech velocity. We have recognized how the pressure to perform paradoxically strengthens this filter, and we have begun to grasp that surrender, a deliberate choice to disengage from this filtering process, is the indispensable key to unlocking spontaneous, unfiltered expression. This principle transcends mere verbal communication. The art of relinquishing control, as exemplified by the ability to speak without a filter, serves as a potent gateway to embracing uncertainty across all facets of life. When we loosen our tenacious grip on control and place faith in our innate capacities, we open ourselves to a universe of new possibilities. This journey toward unhindered performance is merely commencing, and the capacity for freely and swiftly articulating our truth represents a pivotal initial stride. 2. Breaking mental barriers. We all possess them. Those unseen bulwarks erected within the confines of our own minds. We do not intend their construction. Often, we remain oblivious to their very existence. Yet, they stand, like tacit guardians, barring the portals of our authentic selves. These are the mental barriers, the most formidable impediments on the path to unburdening ourselves and embracing the velocity of surrender. Recall a moment when you were called upon to voice an opinion, to proffer an idea, or to manifest something novel. Perhaps it transpired in a formal assembly, a convivial gathering, or even in a quiet exchange with a confidant. You harbored thoughts, your words poised for utterance. Then an intervention occurred. A nascent whisper, or perhaps an entire council of voices, intruded upon your inner landscape. Is this notion sound? What will be their perception of me? Is this the most felicitous articulation? Am I sufficiently astute? This internal discourse, this ceaseless scrutiny and reevaluation, is what we term mental filtering. It is akin to affixing a filter to a camera lens, but instead of enhancing the visual, it blurs the scene and decelerates its unfolding. Mental filtering is the process by which we pause, appraise, and judge our own thoughts, pronouncements, or deeds prior to their emergence. We self-censor. We question the adequacy of our ideas, the flawlessness of our words, or the favorability of our reception. This filtering is frequently propelled by a dread of censure or a simple uncertainty regarding the eventual outcome. It is the conviction that an absolute precision is requisite. This filtering mechanism functions as a colossal dam, arresting the organic current of our capabilities. To articulate ourselves with swiftness and spontaneity, we must surmount this impediment. As sagacious minds have articulated, for you to be able to do this, you can't think and you can't filter. This assertion may strike one as incongruous. Is not cogitation and filtering a salutary practice? Is it not the very engine of our intellect and prudence? Injudicious measures, indeed. However, when it pertains to unprompted expression, to accessing our apex potential, this filtering transforms into our adversary. The more we endeavor to govern and adjudicate each nascent thought or utterance, the more our pace diminishes. We become ensnared. We falter. We may even forfeit the opportune moment for speech or action. This internal arbiter, this perpetual judge, actively conspires against us, rendering us less fluid and less genuine. Contemplate the paradox of performance pressure. We often experience this strain when the aspiration to excel, to impress others, or to conform is paramount. We seek to be perceived as competent, composed, or insightful. Yet, the very exertion to perform or to embody a particular persona estranges us from our innate selves. The transcript analysis illuminates a fundamental truth. It's so hard to perform. It's easy to be you. When subjected to the pressure of performance, we are compelled to depart from our natural state. We step into the glare of conscious control, where every movement is subject to scrutiny. This amplifies our susceptibility to filtering. We commence to second-guess ourselves. We apprehend the prospect of error. We become acutely conscious of the reactions of others. The more we strive to dictate our expression, the less spontaneous and organic it becomes. It is akin to attempting to hasten a flower's bloom by tugging at its petals. The only consequence is damage. True ability radiates most brilliantly when unburdened by the weight of judgment or the imperative of external approbation. At the core of this filtering mechanism lies apprehension. The fear of failure, the dread of appearing foolish, the anxiety of inadequacy. This fear is a potent impetus, yet it frequently directs us toward an erroneous course. When we harbor uncertainty about forthcoming events, or the reception of our words or actions, our internal critic escalates its activity. It whispers doubts, magnifies potential pitfalls, and urges us toward a cautious approach. This is precisely why the act of letting go assumes such profound significance. It is not an abdication of concern. It is a deliberate choice to transcend that apprehension. It is the realization that the peril of refraining from self-expression, of remaining ensnared behind our mental barricades, far outweighs the risk of attempting and perhaps falling short of absolute perfection. What then is the antidote to this pervasive filtering? It is surrender. But surrender does not connote capitulation. It is not synonymous with apathy or a lack of exertion. Rather, surrender is a strategic relinquishment. It is the release of the compulsion for absolute dominion. It is the abandonment of the demand for flawlessness. It is a withdrawal from the incessant craving for validation from external sources. When we surrender, we permit ourselves to inhabit the present moment fully. We place trust in the natural trajectory of our own thoughts and insights. We begin to believe in the inherent capacity that already resides within us. This is the crucible of transformation, where the filtering mechanism begins to recede. As the fundamental tenet posits, your mouth moves faster than your thoughts, and you have to let go and surrender. This is the state wherein our inherent abilities can unfurl unhindered, unburdened by the conscious, critical faculty perpetually striving to keep pace. Let us examine more closely how this internal monologue of self-condemnation actively engenders the very barriers it purports to avert. When an idea germinates, and your mind immediately leaps to "is this sufficiently meritorious?" or "someone else has undoubtedly conceived of this already," you are erecting a barrier. This cognitive process decelerates you. It breeds hesitation. Instead of disseminating that nascent spark of an idea, you may retain it, dissect it, and ultimately extinguish its vitality. The very act of questioning its quality before its complete formulation can preclude its realization. Envision a musician halting mid-note, seized by the sudden thought, "Was that the correct pitch? Will the audience approve?" The music ceases. The continuum is fractured. The potential for a sublime melody is lost. This is how self-judgment, when premature and excessively harsh, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of diminished performance. It does not merely evaluate our expression, it actively impedes it. Now, let us delve into the specific modalities through which the pressure of external validation ignites this filtering mechanism and obstructs spontaneous expression. Even in the absence of overt censure, we frequently imagine it. This perceived judgment, this anxiety concerning the opinions of others, serves as a potent trigger. If you are addressing an assembly and you begin to ponder, are they disengaged? Do they deem my discourse rambling? Is my meaning comprehensible? Your filtering intensifies. Your words become more guarded, more reticent. You may eschew bold assertions or unconventional perspectives for fear of their unfavorable reception. You commence to articulate what you believe they wish to hear, rather than what you genuinely perceive or hold to be true. This pursuit of external affirmation renders us less authentic. It compels us to don a facade, and behind that facade, our inherent capabilities are stifled. The imperative to be perceived as capable, amiable, or intelligent can lead us to filter out anything that feels precarious or vulnerable, elements that often imbue our expression with its greatest potency and relatability. The challenge, therefore, lies in actively dismantling these barriers. It is about recognizing that the ceaseless internal appraisal does not safeguard us, it imprisons us. It is about understanding that the pressure to perform flawlessly is what incapacitates us from performing at our zenith. The art of letting go is not about embracing passivity, it is about cultivating a potent presence. It is about entrusting the wisdom resident within us, the capacity honed over years of learning and experience, and permitting it to flow unhindered. This voyage necessitates a confrontation with the very essence of our internal dialogue. We must attain an awareness of the filtering process without succumbing to its dominion. It is akin to learning to observe the clouds traversing the sky without endeavoring to halt their progress or alter their form. We perceive the thoughts of doubt, the whispers of censure, the anxieties regarding reception, yet we learn not to permit them to dictate our actions. We learn to acknowledge them and then, with gentle yet firm resolve, allow them to drift away. Consider the example of Eliza, a painter who dedicated years to refining her artistry. She possessed the skill to mix pigments with precision, her brushstrokes were technically immaculate, and her subjects were rendered with verisimilitude. Yet, her work felt sterile. When tasked with depicting an emotion, a moment of unadulterated joy or profound sorrow, she would falter. Her mental filter would engage. Does joy manifest thusly? Is this excessive? Will individuals comprehend this sadness? She would labor over the canvas, striving for perfection, for rectitude. Her fear of failing to capture the emotion flawlessly, of being judged for her interpretation, erected a barrier. Her technical proficiency was indisputable, but her spontaneous expression was obstructed. One day, consumed by frustration, Eliza resolved to paint without cogitation, without judgment. She selected music that evoked a powerful sentiment within her and simply allowed her brush to move. She did not strategize. She did not second-guess. If a hue resonated, she employed it. If a stroke conveyed emotion, she amplified its boldness. The outcome was unrefined, imperfect, yet imbued with life. It vibrated with the very emotion she had so assiduously sought to capture previously. She had surrendered to the process, to the sentiment, and to her own innate artistic impulse. The mental filter, for that fleeting instant, was silenced. Her mouth, or in this instance, her brush, moved with greater alacrity than her critical intellect. This is the quintessence of breaching mental barriers. It is a transition from a state of conscious control and judgment to one of conscious surrender and flow. It is the recognition that our natural capacity often surpasses, in its intuition and efficacy, our overthinking, filtering mind. The pressure to perform, the apprehension of judgment, and the incessant internal evaluation conspire to decelerate us, to foster hesitation, and to preclude our access to that deeper, more spontaneous wellspring of talent and creativity. By actively choosing to relinquish these internal demands, we forge the space for our authentic selves to emerge, for our abilities to flow unimpeded, and for us to finally advance at the exhilarating velocity of surrender. Having apprehended the formidable nature of our internal mental barriers, particularly the insidious filtering mechanism propelled by self-judgment and the dread of performance, we now direct our attention to the active cultivation of practices that facilitate their dissolution. The subsequent phase in the art of relinquishment involves not merely acknowledging these barriers, but actively fostering the mindset and employing the techniques that enable us to dismantle them, thereby paving the way for unimpeded natural ability. 3. Embracing spontaneity. There is a profound freedom in relinquishing control. It is not the passive resignation of defeat, but an active, deliberate choice to cease clinging to the rigid dictates of what we believe we ought to be doing, saying, or feeling. When we embrace this unburdening, particularly when the impulse is to express ourselves with immediacy and authenticity, a remarkable transformation occurs. We begin to move with an agility and grace that can astonish even ourselves. Consider the creative impulse. When you strive to speak, to compose, to act, and the fervent desire is for excellence, what often intervenes? The mind, in its zealous pursuit of perfection, begins to operate in overdrive. It becomes a vigilant censor, scrutinizing every nascent thought, every potential word, every tentative gesture before it can manifest. This is the phenomenon of mental filtering. It is the internal arbiter, the ceaseless interrogation. Is this adequate? What will others perceive? Am I articulating this appropriately? This filter is fueled by an undercurrent of inadequacy, a dread of falling short, or a concern for external judgment. It erects a barrier, a bottleneck that impedes our innate fluidity, inducing hesitation, fostering self-doubt, and ultimately, curtailing our capacity to act or speak to the full extent of our potential. To embrace spontaneity is to learn to modulate the volume of this internal censor, allowing our inherent gifts to flow unimpeded. The true essence of spontaneity defies forced cultivation. To attempt spontaneity is akin to forcing a smile to appear genuine. The result is invariably strained and artificial. When we consciously endeavor to be spontaneous, we paradoxically intensify our mental filtering. We begin to strategize. Now is the moment for spontaneity. What constitutes a spontaneous act? How can I appear spontaneous? This performance of spontaneity is diametrically opposed to its true nature. Genuine spontaneity is not an act to be performed, but a state of being. It is the quietude of the inner critic, the ascendance of our natural instincts. A significant portion of our daily existence is spent in a mode of performance. We yearn to impress, to project a specific image, to evade the specter of foolishness. This relentless pressure to perform nourishes our mental filters. We fret about appearing cool, about uttering the correct phrase, about outshining others. This preoccupation with external validation, with the gaze of others, is a primary driver of the filtering process. It engenders hesitation. It prompts us to self-edit before we even articulate. To cultivate spontaneity, we must recalibrate our focus. We must pivot from the imperative of performing for an audience to the imperative of authentic self-expression. The objective is not to be impressive, but to be real. When we cease our anxious pursuit of applause and instead immerse ourselves in the act itself, in the sheer joy of creation or expression, that is when spontaneity can unfurl. Within the act of letting go lies a potent revelation, the concept of giving up. Yet, this is not a surrender indicative of failure. It is a strategic, conscious decision to relinquish the struggle. It signifies abandoning the need for absolute control, for unattainable perfection, for adherence to some imagined ideal. It means ceasing the internecine war against our own authentic selves. When we cease striving to embody an inauthentic persona or to achieve through sheer force of will what runs counter to our natural inclinations, we create a vacuum. This void allows the genuine you to emerge. It is akin to acknowledging, I have been expending immense energy attempting to be this flawless, polished iteration of myself. I am depleted. I shall cease this strenuous effort to be that and simply be me. This act of giving up on the performance, on the meticulously constructed facade, is profoundly liberating. It permits our true, uninhibited self to surface, a self that is often far more capable and natural than we credit it to be. Consider a striking illustration. Envision an individual speaking at an extraordinary velocity, their words cascading forth with such rapidity that they seem to precede conscious thought. While this may appear chaotic, it serves as a potent demonstration of spontaneity. When the vocal apparatus outpaces the deliberative, critical mind, the mental filter is effectively circumvented. The words emanate directly from a more primal, instinctual locus. This is not a deliberate attempt to speak rapidly. It is a state wherein the usual restraints on our speech are momentarily suspended. The compulsion to construct flawless sentences, to select the precise word, or to gauge the listener's reaction, all of these concerns are temporarily set aside. This principle extends beyond mere verbal expression. In any domain where we seek swift and uninhibited self-expression, whether it be executing a musical passage, performing in athletics, or devising a complex solution, the cessation of mental filtering is paramount. When we desist from overthinking, when we refrain from judging our own thoughts or actions as they arise, our inherent abilities can manifest at their zenith. The velocity of surrender is the speed at which we can operate when we cease allowing our internal filters to impede us. It is the speed of pure, unadulterated expression. So, how does this internal filtering mechanism function to stifle spontaneity? It is an intricate construct, but at its core lie several salient components. Foremost is the fear of judgment. This is the deeply ingrained apprehension that others will form a negative opinion of us should we utter or enact something less than perfect, or if we err. This fear compels us to hold back, to tread cautiously, to eschew anything that might attract adverse attention. Then there is perfectionism. This is the unyielding drive to achieve flawless execution, to leave no room for imperfection. Perfectionism is an unremitting adversary of spontaneity, as it necessitates protracted, meticulous deliberation rather than swift, natural action. It stands in stark opposition to allowing things to flow. And intimately connected is self-doubt. This is the internal conviction of our own inadequacy, our lack of inherent worth or skill. When we doubt ourselves, we are more inclined to filter our actions, attempting to conceal our perceived deficiencies or to overcompensate. These elements coalesce. The fear of judgment prompts second-guessing. Perfectionism engenders overanalysis. Self-doubt precipitates hesitation. Collectively, they impose a formidable drag on our natural aptitude, obstructing its free and rapid flow. Picture a musician of exceptional talent. Yet, on a particular evening, under the intense scrutiny of a vast audience, their fingers falter. Their focus has shifted from the music itself to the possibility of hitting a wrong note, to the faces in the crowd, to the question of whether their performance meets the required standard. The mental filter has been activated with overwhelming force. Their accustomed fluid, effortless playing is supplanted by hesitant, stilted notes. The filtering mechanism is actively suppressing the music that already resides within them. The challenge, therefore, lies in actively disengaging these filters. How can we practically abandon the pretense of cool and relinquish the performance mentality? It commences with small, deliberate choices. In everyday discourse, endeavor to articulate the first thought that surfaces, without immediate self-censorship. If an idea arises, share it, even if it lacks perfect articulation. This is not an invitation to rudeness or inanity, but an exercise in cultivating a habit of reduced filtering. It is about training the mind to trust that initial thoughts and impulses often possess intrinsic value. Another avenue is to recalibrate your internal dialogue. Instead of posing the question, "What will they think of me if I do this?" try asking, "What do I wish to do in this moment?" Or what feels most aligned with my authentic self right now? This subtle shift redirects your focus from external validation to internal congruence. It is about honoring your own inner compass rather than perpetually seeking external affirmation. When you find yourself in a situation where the pressure to perform is palpable, take a moment to acknowledge that pressure. Recognize the urge to filter. Then consciously resolve to release it. Envision it as a heavy cloak you are wearing. You possess the agency to remove it. This act of deliberate release, though it may initially feel disorienting, begins to erode the filter's dominion. It is a practice. The more you engage in surrendering the performance mindset, the more facile it becomes. You will begin to realize that most individuals are more preoccupied with their own performances than with scrutinizing yours. And even if scrutiny occurs, the liberation of authentic expression often outweighs their transient opinions. The crucial insight is that spontaneity is not synonymous with chaos or a deficit of skill. It is the absence of internal friction. It represents the natural state of one's aptitude when it is unhindered by self-criticism, fear, or the imperative to impress. When that friction is eliminated, your inherent talent can manifest with optimal speed and its fullest potential. It is akin to a river flowing unimpeded by obstacles. It moves with both power and grace. The paradox inherent in trying to be spontaneous illuminates how our conscious efforts can often undermine the very objective we seek. Spontaneity is a state of being, not an action to be executed. It emerges from a foundation of trust and freedom rather than from deliberate exertion and self-monitoring. When we cease striving so assiduously to be spontaneous, we frequently discover ourselves acting spontaneously. It bears a resemblance to attempting to fall asleep. The more you exert yourself, the more awake you become. However, when you relax and abandon the effort, sleep often arrives effortlessly. Spontaneity operates similarly. It manifests when we loosen our grip on control and judgment. The concept of giving up is central to this discourse. It signifies relinquishing the ego's insatiable need for dominion, for flawlessness, for affirmation. When we surrender that need, we permit our true selves, with their inherent capabilities and idiosyncrasies, to come forth. This is where the adage, "It is effortless to be you," simply surrender, finds its profound resonance. It implies abandoning the arduous struggle to be someone else, to meet unattainable standards, or to perform for an audience. It means ceasing the conflict against your own natural trajectory. When you relinquish that conflict, you are left with your authentic self, and that self possesses the capacity for remarkable spontaneity and velocity. The analogy of speed, where an individual speaks more rapidly than their conscious mind can process, serves as a vivid illustration. It demonstrates that our minds possess filters that, while often beneficial for social navigation and considered communication, can also function as substantial impediments to our natural aptitudes. When those impediments are removed, our potential for rapid, unhindered expression becomes evident. This is not an endorsement of nonsensical utterance. Rather, it is an access point to a deeper, swifter dimension of our communicative faculties. It offers a glimpse into the possibilities that arise when the internal critic is silenced. By actively choosing to release the reins of our internal critic and the pressure of external perception, we forge a path toward a state of effortless action and authentic expression. This newfound liberation, born of surrender, not only enhances our capacity for swift speech or action, it fundamentally redefines our relationship with challenges, transforming them from sources of anxiety into opportunities for unhindered, natural capability to flourish. The subsequent phase of this exploration involves examining how this cultivated spontaneity can be harnessed and applied, not merely in moments of peak performance, but as a guiding principle for navigating the intricacies of our lives. 4. Finding freedom in expression. The art of letting go. Finding freedom in expression. A curious phenomenon unfolds when we strive too fervently. We yearn for excellence, for the apt word, for the creation of something extraordinary. This aspiration often leads us to exert an iron grip on ourselves. We scrutinize our intended pronouncements, then dissect their auditory impact, and finally, we anticipate the judgments of others. This meticulously calibrated progression, though perceived as control, as the meticulous cultivation of perfection, is in fact its antithesis. It is akin to ensnaring a butterfly by its wings. The more fiercely you grasp, the more it struggles, leaving you with naught but fragmented remnants. True liberation, and the velocity it engenders, is discovered when we release our grip. Recall a moment when you were utterly absorbed in an activity you cherished. Perhaps it was the engrossing world of a game, the resonant melody of a song, or a profound exchange with a kindred spirit. Did you pause to ponder, am I executing this correctly? Or will this resonate with them? You were simply engaged. Your thoughts, your actions, your words flowed with the unforced grace of a natural spring. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. This is the state achieved when our internal sensors are disengaged. Our minds, while magnificent instruments, can also become our most formidable prisons. We possess an inherent filtering mechanism, as it has come to be known. This is the insidious inner voice that whispers cautions. Refrain from uttering that. It is foolish, or are you certain of its adequacy? Or what if derision follows? This is mental filtering in its most active form. It is our internal arbiter, perpetually observing, evaluating, and often condemning. It subjects our raw thoughts, our spontaneous inclinations, to an unforgiving scrutiny, questioning, does this possess merit? Is it prudent? Will it be embraced? This incessant interrogation and self-censorship is the very impediment to our swiftness. It is akin to attempting a sprint with weights tethered to one's ankles. The more we filter, the heavier those burdens become. This filtering is frequently born of apprehension. The dread of judgment looms large. We harbor anxieties regarding the reception of our ideas, our pronouncements, our creations. We fear inadequacy in intellect, talent, or captivating presence. Furthermore, we recoil from uncertainty. The unpredictable trajectory of outcomes compels us to attempt control through excessive deliberation and filtering. This fear engenders caution, and caution is the nemesis of alacrity and spontaneity. It compels us to pause, to self-edit before even commencing, thereby extinguishing the vital energy and inherent authenticity of the initial impulse. The fundamental key to transcending this impediment lies in surrender. However, surrender is not synonymous with capitulation. It is not a passive acquiescence to circumstance. It is an active volition, a conscious decision to disengage from our internal critic. It is the declaration, very well, inner voice, I acknowledge your presence, but I shall not cede the helmet. This juncture. It is the choice to place faith in our innate capabilities, our instincts, and our inherent creativity to manifest without perpetual surveillance. It is akin to a musician finally entrusting their hands to execute the notes without second-guessing each individual passage. The depth of their practice has rendered their body adept. Surrender is permitting that cultivated proficiency to assume command, unburdened by the anxiety of error. A potent paradigm for conceptualizing this is the abandon the pretense of coolness principle. We frequently self-censor out of a desire to project a specific persona. We aspire to appear sagacious, composed, or effortlessly accomplished. We endeavor to curate our public image. Yet, this ceaseless exertion to maintain an aura of coolness or perfection constitutes its own form of filtration. It obstructs genuine self-expression. When we can relinquish the compulsion to impress, when we can embrace a degree of imperfection, of disarray, of sheer humanity, something remarkable transpires. The pressure dissipates. We cease performing and commence expressing. The focus shifts from our outward presentation to our active engagement. And within this shift, we uncover a profound reservoir of freedom. This freedom is intrinsically interwoven with speed. When our minds are not occupied with the meticulous monitoring of every thought, the censorship of every utterance, and the apprehension of potential repercussions, they are liberated. They can operate at their natural, unencumbered velocity. This is the velocity of authenticity. It is the speed of unfeigned laughter, of a spontaneous insight, or of an intuitive decision. It surpasses the capacity of the conscious mind for analysis and judgment. By relinquishing our filters, we permit this inherent velocity to emerge. We articulate ourselves with greater celerity, fluidity, and often efficacy. This is not about haste. It is about dismantling the internal barriers that impose sluggishness. Let us examine this more closely. What specific internal monologues frequently trigger this filtering mechanism, particularly during creative endeavors or performances? They are diverse, yet common instances include, that concept is overly simplistic. This has been conceived by everyone already. I lack the requisite expertise to address this. This lacks the polish of X's work, or they will perceive me as foolish. These are the murmurs of the inner critic. They surface precisely when we are on the cusp of articulating an idea, composing a sentence, or even offering a simple suggestion. They precipitate a moment of pause, a hesitation during which we halt and contemplate, should I truly voice this? This pause is the filter in operation, questioning its quality, judging it against an imagined benchmark, and fearing the potential reactions of others. It is the very definition of mental filtering, and it directly impedes our capacity for natural self-expression. How, then, can we actively cultivate the detachment from these filters and the pressure of external validation? This is a practice, not an instantaneous switch. One method is through mindful observation. When you detect the emergence of that inner critic, do not engage in conflict. Simply observe it. Acknowledge the thought, there is that familiar voice asserting my idea is insufficient. Then, with gentle intention, choose to withhold its power. You are not obligated to believe it. You are not compelled to act upon it. You can allow it to drift by, much like a cloud traversing the sky. Another practice involves deliberately setting forth minor, low-stakes challenges. Attempt to articulate a slightly less refined thought in casual discourse. Offer a suggestion in a low-pressure meeting. Draft a preliminary version of something without the immediate pursuit of flawlessness. The objective is not to produce a masterpiece, but to rehearse the act of releasing the filter. Each instance of this practice fortifies your confidence in your ability to express yourself without undue contemplation. You teach yourself that the world does not collapse when your expression is not perfectly filtered. We can also reframe our perception of performance. Rather than viewing it as an examination demanding approval, we can conceive of it as an act of sharing, of contribution, of simple being. When we shift our focus from acquiring validation to contributing value or experiencing the intrinsic joy of the act itself, the imperative to filter diminishes. This is where surrender truly takes root. It is a surrender of the ego's need for rectitude, for admiration, and a surrender to the process, to the present moment, to our own inherent capabilities. Consider the narrative of Maya. Maya possessed considerable writing talent, yet she grappled with deadlines. Not due to a dearth of ideas, but because each sentence felt like an arduous babble. Her inner critic was unyielding. This metaphor is trite, it would hiss. This paragraph is excessively lengthy. No one will persevere through this. She would spend hours agonizing over a solitary paragraph, deleting and rewriting, her progress agonizingly slow. The pressure of the unblemished page, compounded by the fear of failing to meet her own exacting standards, rendered her paralyzed. One day, confronted by a particularly daunting deadline, Maya resolved to adopt a novel approach. She recalled a discussion concerning the speed of surrender. She resolved to actively endeavor to quiet her inner critic. She commenced by admonishing herself, simply write. Refrain from judgment. Just commit the words to paper. She envisioned her inner critic as a diminutive, chattering simian perched upon her shoulder. She did not attempt to dislodge the creature, but she also resolved not to heed its every complaint. She concentrated on the task at hand, transcribing words onto the page. She began to type, not with the intention of crafting exquisite prose, but merely to fill the void. She wrote about her day, about the prevailing weather, about a random thought that materialized in her mind. It was haphazard, disjointed, and certainly not publishable. Yet it was expression. And as she continued typing, a subtle transformation occurred. The simian on her shoulder began to quiet, its chatter diminishing in insistence. The act of simply transcribing words, devoid of the pressure of perfection, began to liberate her mental faculties. Subsequently, she commenced weaving in her actual narrative. The words flowed with greater ease. She still detected the critic's voice intermittently, but now she possessed a strategy for managing it. She would acknowledge the thought very well, that sentence may not represent the pinnacle of literary brilliance, and then gently redirect her attention back to the writing itself. She was relinquishing the imperative for immediate flawlessness. She was entrusting herself to the possibility of future refinement. What transpired next astonished her. The words began to pour forth. Ideas coalesced with enhanced fluidity. She found herself writing at a tempo she had not experienced in years. She was not preoccupied with how her work would be received, or whether it adhered to some unattainable standard. She was simply immersed in the act of creation. By the close of the day, she possessed a rough draft that was considerably more complete than anything she had produced in weeks of agonizing over every syllable. She had attained a measure of liberation. She had discovered that by surrendering the filters, she could unlock a velocity and a flow that had previously remained concealed. This is not an endorsement of negligence. It is an advocacy for liberation. It is an understanding that the most potent expression emanates not from rigid control, but from a willingness to relinquish it. It is about fostering trust in the process, trust in ourselves, and allowing our inherent capabilities to ascend, unburdened by the weight of judgment and the fear of inadequacy. When we abandon the pursuit of perfect filtration, we discover the exhilarating speed and profound authenticity of genuine expression. This freedom is not a destination, it is a practice, a daily commitment to step away from the critic and step into the current. Chapter 2. The Courage to be Real. 1. Facing Fear of Judgment. The world watches, or so it feels. We step onto a stage, into a boardroom, or even into a simple conversation, and an unseen jury materializes. Their gazes are sharp, their judgments poised, their pronouncements, we dread, swift. This pervasive sensation, this ceaseless hum of evaluation, is the ultimate catalyst for mental filtering. It is the dread of scrutiny, a formidable force that compels us to second-guess every utterance, every gesture, every nascent idea before it has even drawn its first breath. Consider this. When you are truly at ease, when you are simply yourself, thoughts and actions unfurl with effortless grace. You might offer a witty observation, conjure an inventive solution, or articulate an emotion without undue deliberation. But the instant you perceive that spotlight, whether real or conjured, illuminating you, a subtle yet profound shift occurs. Your internal alarm bells begin to peal. Will they approve? Is this sufficiently insightful? What if they deem me foolish? What if I falter? These inquiries, born of the apprehension of judgment, function as a relentless editor within your mind, striking out perfectly viable phrases before they can even be committed to paper. This is mental filtering in its active state, with the fear of judgment serving as its most insistent, ever-present editor. This dread compels us to perform. We orchestrate a spectacle, striving to embody what we perceive others desire, rather than simply revealing our authentic selves. It is akin to attempting to render a beautiful melody while perpetually glancing over one's shoulder, preoccupied with the potential reactions of neighbors. The music becomes stilted, the notes are withheld, and the true essence of the melody is lost. When our energies are consumed by the meticulous management of others' perceptions, our capacity for genuine presence and spontaneity is irrevocably diminished. Our innate capabilities, the raw talent that yearns to shine, are buried beneath layers of self-consciousness. The yearning for acceptance, for the approval and positive regard of others, is a fundamental human imperative. It is natural to desire belonging. However, when this desire transmutes into a need for external validation, it morphs into a gilded cage. We begin to quantify our worth by the nods, the smiles, or the applause of those around us. Our expression becomes contingent. I will share this concept if it is flawless, and if it garners their sanction. This reliance on external opinions impedes our willingness to take risks, to present those half-formed, brilliant notions that hold the potential for extraordinary outcomes. We become paralyzed by the fear of imperfection, and in doing so, forfeit the liberation of true originality. The transcript wisely reminds us, it is easier to be you than to perform. This sentiment resonates profoundly. Performance demands immense energy to sustain a facade, whereas embodying oneself, with all one's idiosyncrasies and imperfections, is inherently more natural and sustainable. This fear of judgment stands as a direct impediment to our inherent abilities. Our raw talents, our singular perspectives on the world, are often unrefined in their nascent stages. They are not always polished or perfectly articulated. Yet, it is precisely within this rawness that the magic resides. Envision a river. It flows with an innate power, a natural force, sometimes carrying with it a trace of mud and debris. Yet, its course is potent and life-sustaining. If we were to construct a dam across this river out of apprehension that its waters were not sufficiently pure, for all, we would arrest its flow. We would prevent its journey to the sea. Our natural ability is analogous to that river. The fear of judgment, the anxiety that our water is inadequate, erects dams. It obstructs the free, uninhibited current that is indispensable for peak performance. We begin to internalize the belief that our raw, unfiltered thoughts or actions are somehow erroneous or unacceptable. This is where the concept of giving up on cool assumes paramount importance. What, after all, constitutes cool? Frequently, it is an artifice we construct within our minds, predicated on our assumptions of what others expect or admire. It is a performance, a meticulously curated persona designed to elude judgment. When we pursue cool, we are not operating from a place of authenticity. We are endeavoring to conform to a mold fabricated by others or by society at large. To relinquish the need to be cool is to abdicate that performance. It signifies an acceptance that one may not always articulate the perfect sentiment, possess the most impressive insight, or present oneself in precisely the manner one deems appropriate. Upon abandoning the pursuit of cool, a significant reservoir of mental energy is liberated. Instead of perpetually monitoring oneself for indications of uncoolness, one can direct focus toward what one genuinely wishes to convey or accomplish. Experimentation becomes possible. Awkwardness is permissible. Passion can be expressed, even if it appears excessive to others. This surrender is not an endorsement of sloppiness or negligence. It is the act of releasing the self-imposed pressure to adhere to an external standard of coolness that is often illusory. It is a conscious choice for authenticity over the pursuit of approval. Let us consider Maya, a painter of considerable talent. Her work possesses a distinctive style, imbued with vibrant hues and bold brushstrokes. However, when engaged in the creation of a piece destined for a gallery exhibition, she finds herself succumbing to self-doubt. She peruses the work of other artists online, recalls a critic's pronouncement years prior regarding her lack of refinement, and her internal editor commences an unbridled frenzy. She begins to mute her colors, to refine her lines with excessive precision, to paint what she believes a gallery owner would find palatable. The inherent joy recedes from her creations. They become technically proficient, but devoid of their intrinsic spark, the quintessential mayonnaise. She is filtering her art, attempting to render it acceptable, striving to circumvent the judgment that might declare it insufficiently polished. The fear of judgment has transformed her effervescent river into a meticulously managed, yet ultimately less potent, stream. One day, Mia embarked on a personal project, undertaken solely for her own edification. There was no pressure, no deadlines, no imagined audience. She was simply painting. She splashed paint with abandon, allowed colors to meld in unexpected configurations, and relinquished the pursuit of perfection. The resulting piece felt more vibrant, more intrinsically her, than anything she had produced in months. It was raw, it was imperfect, yet it was undeniably beautiful. That moment imparted a profound revelation. When the fear of judgment is silenced, her true artistic capabilities find their unimpeded flow. This brings us to the crux of the challenge. How does one actively confront this fear? It is not a matter of magically eradicating it. Rather, it involves comprehending its nature and consciously choosing to proceed nonetheless. Reflect upon this. How does the specific apprehension of judgment manifest within your own creative or performance pursuits? Dedicate a moment to genuine introspection. When you are on the verge of articulating an idea at work, what thoughts intrude? They will deem it frivolous. I lack comprehensive data. Someone else has likely conceived of this already. When preparing to address an audience, What are your anxieties? A trembling voice? A lapse in memory? An embarrassing utterance? When commencing writing, what deters you from inscribing the initial word? Is it the dread that it will prove inadequate, that it will invite criticism? These are the tangible manifestations of how the fear of judgment compels us to filter. It is not merely an amorphous sensation. It comprises a specific constellation of internal dialogues that censor our output. It engenders overthinking, leading to stagnation. We meticulously analyze every conceivable negative reaction and, in so doing, render ourselves inert. Our focus becomes so fixated on evading censure that we lose sight of the fundamental purpose of expression: to connect, to create, to share. Now, let us delve more deeply into the second analytical query. In what circumstances have you experienced the most acute pressure to perform due to the perceived scrutiny of others, and how did this pressure impede your natural ability or spontaneity? Recall those moments. Was it a job interview where you felt every word was being meticulously weighed? Was it a family reunion where you felt compelled to assume the role of the witty individual or the peacemaker? Was it a creative workshop where you perceived everyone else to be more accomplished? During those instances, did you observe a shift in your natural demeanor? Perhaps you adopted a more formal posture, a less playful disposition. You may have begun to offer lengthier, more rehearsed responses. It is even conceivable that you suppressed a genuine emotion for fear of its misinterpretation. This pressure to perform, to inhabit a persona other than your own, is a direct consequence of the fear of judgment. It confines us within a restrictive box, and our natural ability, which flourishes in an environment of freedom and spontaneity, cannot thrive within such limitations. It is akin to attempting to teach a bird to swim. It is antithetical to its inherent design, and that imposition of such a task would be immensely burdensome and counterproductive. The third, and perhaps most critical, analytical question is this: what are the underlying beliefs or past experiences that have solidified your fear of judgment, and how can you commence questioning their validity within the context of authentic expression? This is where we unearth the root cause. Our fear of judgment is rarely an isolated phenomenon. It is frequently forged from prior experiences. Perhaps a mentor offered a scathing critique of your work. Perhaps a friend ridiculed something you said. Perhaps you were raised in an environment where errors were met with severe disapproval. These experiences can engender deeply ingrained beliefs. I am insufficient. My ideas lack merit. If others perceive my true self, they will reject me. These beliefs function as formidable shackles. They fuel the fear of judgment and render the process of mental filtering an automatic reflex. To commence questioning their validity, we must examine them with a discerning, yet compassionate, lens. Are those antiquated criticisms still pertinent today? Has your proficiency evolved? Have the individuals who judged you undergone transformation, or have you simply outgrown their perspectives? Frequently, we carry the burden of past judgments long after the individuals who rendered them have forgotten. We judge ourselves based on obsolete information. Consider this: if a child stumbles and scrapes their knee, we offer comfort and assist them in rising. We do not declare them clumsy and incapable of proper locomotion. We encourage them to persevere. Yet, as adults, we often treat ourselves with far less clemency. When we err or express something that is not universally well received, we can become our own most formidable critics, reinforcing those old, detrimental beliefs. To initiate the process of questioning the validity of these apprehensions, try this. When a judgmental thought surfaces, pause. Inquire of yourself: is this thought veracious? What substantiation exists for its veracity? What evidence contradicts it? Frequently, you will discover that the evidence supporting the negative thought is tenuous, rooted in past events or assumptions, whereas the evidence of your capabilities and inherent worth is considerably more robust, though simply overlooked. The act of surrendering the fear of judgment is not an endeavor to become devoid of fear. It is the recognition of fear, the acknowledgement of its presence, and the deliberate choice to advance regardless. It is an understanding that the risk of being judged is far less detrimental than the certainty of stifling one's own expression. When you cease striving for perfection for an imagined audience, you open the portal for your authentic self to emerge. This is the courage to be genuine. It is the willingness to be vulnerable, to embrace imperfection, and to trust that your authentic voice possesses intrinsic value, irrespective of external validation. The pervasive dread of judgment operates as a self-imposed censor, dictating the boundaries of our permissible expression and thereby inhibiting our natural flow. To truly embrace the courage of authenticity, we must embark upon the active, conscious process of relinquishing this fear. This is not about its complete eradication, but about choosing to act in defiance of it. It is about permitting our authentic selves to manifest, unburdened by the imagined opinions of others. This leads us to the subsequent critical juncture, comprehending how to navigate the internal dialogue that perpetuates this fear. It is within this space of surrender judgment that we can finally commence operating at the tempo of surrender, allowing our capabilities to flow unimpeded at a velocity that surpasses the critical mind's capacity to keep pace. 2. The cost of self-censorship. The voice within your mind. It is a perpetual companion, is it not? At times, it murmurs with gentle guidance, offering sage counsel. At others, it bellows with the ferocity of a critic, dissecting every potential flaw before a single step is taken. This internal arbiter, this unyielding censor, is what we term mental filtering. It is the ceaseless evaluation of our thoughts, our utterances, our actions, even before they fully coalesce. It poses the questions: is this adequate? Will it be received favorably? What if I falter? This filtering mechanism, often rooted in a deep-seated apprehension of inadequacy or the dread of external censure, functions as a formidable gatekeeper. It erects a barrier between your inherent capacities and their outward manifestation, thereby decelerating all progress. Consider its impact. When confronted with a task demanding unadulterated spontaneity, an endeavor requiring you to perform at your absolute zenith in the moment, this filtering process transforms into your most formidable adversary. The book's central thesis posits that to achieve true brilliance, to express yourself at your peak, you must relinquish the dominion of this internal censor. Surrender is paramount. However, before we can embrace this liberation, we must first comprehend the toll this filtering exacts. The act of filtering thoughts directly opposes the very state conducive to peak spontaneous expression. Envision a musician embarking on an improvisational solo. Their fingers should dance across the fretboard, guided by instinct and the accumulated wisdom of years of practice. Yet, if with each note struck, the inner critic interjects, "That pitch is slightly off. Was that progression too predictable?" Hesitation will inevitably ensue. The tempo will falter. A rigidity will set in. The raw, exquisite music that could have flowed forth becomes ensnared behind a bulwark of doubt. This is the price of self-censorship. It is not merely a matter of diminished speed. It is an intrinsic impediment to the unhindered flow of your natural artistry. The very definition of mental filtering, an internal process of evaluating thoughts, words, or actions before they are expressed, underscores its antithetical nature to spontaneity. This evaluation, this scrutiny of quality, this preoccupation with potential repercussions, it stands in stark opposition to the essence of spontaneity. Spontaneity flourishes when evaluation is so swift, so automatic, that it recedes into the background, or ideally, ceases to exist altogether. When you are performing at your absolute best, your cognitive focus is not on the act of performing, but on the experience of doing. The filtering mechanism compels you to intellectualize the act, thereby arresting its fluid execution. What ignites this incessant internal monologue? More often than not, it is the pressure we perceive. This pressure can emanate from a multiplicity of sources. It might manifest as the fear of missteps in the presence of others, the anxiety of unmet expectations, or the simple discomfort inherent in vulnerability. When we feel observed, or when the stakes appear elevated, this filtering mechanism enters an accelerated mode. It functions akin to a security system calibrated to maximum sensitivity, flagging every minor detail as a potential threat. The transcript's assertion that one cannot simultaneously think and filter at extreme speeds is pivotal. To attain such velocity, such fluidity, the conscious, critical intellect, the very engine of mental filtering, must yield its position. This is not to condemn the critical mind, rather, it is to acknowledge that it is ill-suited for the rapid cadence of pure expression. It is akin to attempting to pilot a race car with the emergency brake engaged. Forward motion may occur, but optimal performance remains elusive. This filtering is not merely a temporary impediment. It represents a fundamental constraint. We frequently perceive self-censorship as a means of control, a strategy to ensure rectitude in our pronouncements and actions, thereby averting embarrassment. We regard it as a protective shield, warding off negative judgment. Yet, the reality is far more nuanced. This perceived control is, in fact, a form of self-imposed limitation. It is analogous to constructing an elaborate fence around a garden. While it may deter some weeds, it simultaneously obstructs the outward expansion of beautiful blossoms. You are, in essence, curtailing your own reach. Consider Sarah, a writer of considerable talent who perpetually experienced a knot of apprehension before submitting her manuscripts. She would dedicate hours to revising sentences, excising paragraphs, and agonizing over word choices. She genuinely believed this meticulous process was the bedrock of her writing's quality. Her editor, however, perceived something different. While technically impeccable, the prose lacked a certain vital spark. It felt constrained. Sarah's filtering mechanism was so potent that it meticulously smoothed away all the audacious edges, all the bold conceptualizations, all the distinctive turns of phrase that constituted her unique voice. She was so consumed with ensuring her writing was acceptable that she neglected to allow it to be hers. Her internal censor operated as a fastidious librarian, ensuring every volume on the shelf was impeccably ordered, yet missing the thrill of discovering a wild, untamed narrative. The imperative to attain perfection, to evade any hint of criticism, had led her to filter out the very elements that would have elevated her work to distinction. She was maintaining an illusion of command, while in reality she was profoundly restricted, unable to access the full spectrum of her creative potential. Beyond merely decelerating our pace or limiting our scope, habitual self-censorship engenders something even more profound. It corrodes our authenticity. When we perpetually second-guess ourselves, meticulously edit our thoughts, and contort our words to align with our perceived expectations of others, we drift progressively further from our true selves. We become actors, assuming a role rather than embodying our genuine being. Our inherent abilities, our innate talents, our singular perspectives, these become buried beneath layers of self-doubt and a relentless pursuit of external validation. It is akin to possessing a pure, pristine spring, yet perpetually capping it, fearing that its unrestrained flow might lead to overflow or disarray. The water remains clear and invigorating, but it cannot reach its intended recipients. This erosion of authenticity represents a significant cost. It signifies our failure to fully engage with our lives. In conversations, we may withhold a brilliant insight for fear of appearing foolish. In creative endeavors, we might abandon a project because its nascent stages feel untidy or imperfect. Within our relationships, we may conceal aspects of ourselves, fearing that our true nature is unlovable or unacceptable. This continuous editing, this internal filtering, breeds hesitation in sharing our unfiltered thoughts, our genuine emotions, or our raw creations. It is a gradual process, often so subtle that its occurrence goes unnoticed until a profound sense of disconnection from oneself and one's potential arises. The fundamental catalyst for all this filtering is fear. It is the fear of judgment, the fear of rejection, the fear of inadequacy. We harbor the apprehension that if we reveal our authentic selves, if we articulate our thoughts without reservation, we will be perceived as flawed, intellectually deficient, or unworthy. This fear cultivates fertile ground for the mental filtering mechanism to flourish. It whispers insidious doubts, amplifies latent insecurities, and persuades us that the path of self-censorship is the most secure. Imagine a young artist, Alex, who delights in employing bold, vibrant pigments. Alex possesses an innate gift for juxtaposing hues in unconventional ways, thereby generating striking visual compositions. However, Alex's art instructor consistently emphasizes realism and meticulous technique. Consequently, Alex begins to filter their own creative impulses. Instead of instinctively reaching for that electrifying shade of blue, Alex hesitates, contemplating, that is excessive. It will not appear authentic. The instructor will deem me unserious. Thus, Alex selects a more subdued, predictable hue. The resultant painting, while technically sound, forfeits the raw energy, the distinctive vision that was Alex's own. The dread of being perceived as an unserious artist compelled Alex to filter out the very essence of their creative spirit. Alex was sacrificing the joy of authentic expression for the perceived security of conformity. This fear reigns as a formidable sovereign. It compels us to operate within limited parameters. It dissuades us from embracing risks. It prevents us from fully deploying the unique gifts we are meant to bestow upon the world. The cost of this fear and the self-censorship it perpetuates is immense. It extends beyond missed opportunities for personal growth. It encompasses the forfeiture of genuine connection. When we filter ourselves, we present a meticulously curated version of our identity, thereby impeding others from truly engaging with us. Authentic connection is forged when we are seen and embraced for who we are, imperfections included. Furthermore, there is the cost of lost creative epiphanies. Countless brilliant ideas emerge from the chaotic, unfiltered processes of thought. It is within the free association, the meandering digressions, the speculative what-if scenarios that true innovation often resides. Yet, when our internal censor remains perpetually vigilant, it severs these tangents before they can lead to fertile ground. It is akin to attempting to explore a vast, uncharted wilderness with a diminutive gardening trowel. The scope of discovery is inherently limited. The sheer mental toll exacted by maintaining this internal censor constitutes another significant cost. The ceaseless monitoring of one's thoughts, the meticulous evaluation of one's words, and the anticipation of potential reactions consume an extraordinary amount of cognitive energy. It is akin to running a daily marathon without respite. This mental exhaustion can permeate all facets of one's existence, leaving one depleted and devoid of inspiration. Recall those moments when you felt truly alive, utterly immersed in the flow of activity. It is highly probable that, during those instances, your internal filter was disengaged. You were not preoccupied with what to say or do, you were simply experiencing. You were fully present in the moment, your natural aptitudes flowing unimpeded. The cost of self-censorship is the relinquishment of these moments. It is the price we pay for eschewing the courage to be genuine, for not allowing our authentic selves to radiate forth. It is the opportunity cost of a life lived behind a shield, rather than on an open expanse. The relentless internal editor, fueled by the apprehension of judgment, not only stifles our immediate expression, but also subtly reconfigures our very self-perception, engendering reluctance to reveal our true capabilities. Consequently, the subsequent imperative is to comprehend not merely the cost of this censorship, but the profound liberation and empowerment that arises from actively choosing to disarm this internal critic and embrace the inherent vulnerability of authentic self-expression. 3. Pressure vs. authenticity. We often find ourselves ensnared in a peculiar paradox. On one hand, an unyielding yearning beckons us toward authenticity, to speak our minds with unvarnished truth, to create with unfettered spirit. On the other, a powerful undertow pulls us toward the stage of performance, a realm where our worth is seemingly calibrated by the brilliance of our outward show, the seamless execution of our roles, and our perfect conformity to prescribed molds. This perpetual tug-of-war breeds a disquieting tension, a profound sense of being rent between our intrinsic selves and the idealized versions we believe we ought to embody. Reflect upon this. From our earliest awakenings, we learn that adherence to prescribed norms garners commendation. We internalize that certain behaviors are met with reward, while others invite censure, or worse, a chilling silence. This conditioning, though often born of benevolent intent, lays the groundwork for a life lived under an imagined spotlight, even when the audience is absent. We begin to equate our inherent value with our capacity for performance, for perpetual readiness, for an unwavering facade of flawlessness. This conviction becomes the very engine of the performance trap, whispering insidious doubts that any deviation from the impressive signifies a fundamental deficit. This is not confined to grand pronouncements or pivotal presentations. It infiltrates the quotidian. It manifests in the meticulously curated digital selves, presenting a highlight reel rather than the messy, vibrant tapestry of lived experience. It resides in the carefully calibrated language of emails, striving for an aura of competence that may belie inner uncertainty. It surfaces in social engagements where genuine laughter or an idiosyncratic observation might be stifled in favor of a more palatable, a more safe response. This relentless pressure to perform, to consistently meet an arbitrary standard of good enough, of impressive, of universally likable, erects an artificial bulwark around us. We become players in our own dramas, perpetually enacting a role, and this ceaseless effort is profoundly draining. This unremitting demand for performance is precisely what ignites our internal editor, the mechanism of mental filtering. Imagine a microscopic, hypercritical overseer residing within, perpetually scrutinizing every nascent thought, every impending action. Is this adequate? Will it elicit approval? What if it is perceived as foolish? What if I falter? This filtering is a direct progeny of the fear of judgment. When the imperative for perfection looms large, our minds enter a state of hypervigilance. They begin to dissect, to question, to second-guess each impulse, each utterance, each deed. Should I voice this? No, it might sound awkward. Should I undertake that? They may disapprove. This filtering stands in stark opposition to spontaneous, unadulterated expression. It is the brake applied to the engine of our innate capabilities. The greater the perceived pressure, the more constrictive this filter becomes, impeding our momentum, fostering hesitation, and ultimately thwarting the emergence of our authentic selves. Consider the pervasive allure of being cool. This is a potent catalyst for pressure. We crave acceptance, admiration, the perception of effortless competence and desirability. Yet, the pursuit of coolness is an arduous and depleting undertaking. It frequently necessitates the suppression of our genuine sentiments, our distinctive eccentricities, our occasional awkward enthusiasms, all in service of projecting an image we believe will secure our belonging. This breeds a profound sense of inauthenticity. We are performing coolness rather than inhabiting it. The transcript's simple yet resonant insight, "It's so hard to perform. It's easy to be you. Just give up," strikes a profound chord here. Relinquishing the performance of cool is the initial stride toward embracing the inherent ease and liberation of simply existing as oneself. When we cease the arduous task of maintaining a facade, when we release the exhausting effort of projecting an artificial persona, we carve out a space where our true selves can breathe. This is not an endorsement of sloppiness or crudeness. It is about shedding the superfluous layers of pretense and allowing our natural essence to radiate. The intrinsic grace and freedom of simply being, with all our inherent imperfections and unique qualities, far surpasses the ceaseless struggle to uphold a fabricated cool veneer. So, how do we extricate ourselves from this performance trap and the insidious filtering it engenders? The answer lies in surrender. Yet, This is not a surrender of resignation or defeat. It is a surrender to the present moment, a surrender to our inherent capabilities, and a surrender to the embrace of imperfection. It is a deliberate choice to relinquish the ceaseless craving for external validation. When we cease striving to orchestrate every facet of our expression, when we release the desperate need to conform to phantom external demands, we forge a pathway for our authentic selves to surface. This act of surrender is a potent antidote to the pressures that compel us to filter. It signifies an acknowledgement that perfection is not a prerequisite, that it is permissible to be a work in progress, and that our intrinsic value is not contingent upon the acclamation of others. Let us delve deeper into how the apprehension of external judgment, whether from others or our own internal arbiters, directly activates and amplifies the process of mental filtering. This fear functions as a trigger, initiating an internal alarm system. When we anticipate potential critique, embarrassment, or disapproval, our minds instinctively shift into a protective posture. This protection manifests as filtering. We begin to self-censor our thoughts, withholding ideas that feel too audacious or too unconventional. We meticulously refine our language, attempting to discover the safest or most impressive articulation, often sacrificing the original spontaneity and genuine feeling. Our actions become more guarded. We may hesitate to venture a risk, to proffer an idea, or even to articulate a simple emotion, all due to anxieties about how it might be received. This filtering is not merely about avoiding missteps. It is about evading vulnerability. It is an attempt to present a polished, impenetrable version of ourselves, impervious to criticism. The specific manifestations of this filtering are manifold. A writer may excise passages that feel too intimate, a speaker might circumvent a controversial yet crucial point, a musician might adhere to familiar harmonic structures rather than venturing into novel melodic territories, and in everyday discourse, we might offer placid agreement rather than voicing a dissenting perspective. All these are instances of our internal editor operating at peak capacity, driven by the fear that our raw, unfiltered selves might prove unacceptable. This inherent conflict between pressure and authenticity becomes particularly acute in specific contexts. Consider the realm of creative endeavor. When an artist feels the weight of expectation to produce something commercially viable or widely lauded, their natural creative current can become constricted. The fear of failing to meet these expectations leads to the suppression of unconventional ideas, singular styles, or deeply personal themes. The resultant output is often technically proficient but devoid of soul. In public discourse, the pressure to appear knowledgeable, charismatic, and flawless can lead to a highly rehearsed, almost robotic delivery. The speaker may eschew genuine connection with the audience, fearing that any departure from the script, any moment of unscripted thought, could be construed as a mistake. The tangible consequence here is a diminished impact. The audience perceives the artifice, the absence of genuine passion, and the message, however meticulously researched, fails to resonate deeply. In social interactions, the pressure to be liked or accepted can compel us to suppress our genuine opinions, interests, or even our sense of humor. We may find ourselves mirroring those around us, transforming into chameleons who blend in, but never truly connect. The consequence is superficial relationships, a pervasive sense of isolation even amidst company, and a persistent, gnawing feeling of not being truly seen. The price paid for prioritizing performance over genuine expression is a life lived behind a mask, existence where true connection and profound fulfillment remain perpetually out of reach. The antidote to this constant pressure and the enforced filtering it necessitates is a profound act of surrender. It is about consciously choosing to relinquish control, to trust that our innate capabilities are sufficient, and to accept that imperfection is not a deficit, but an intrinsic component of the human condition. This surrender is not a passive gesture, it demands courage. It requires fortitude to confront the possibility of disapproval, to risk not being cool, and to embrace the vulnerability that accompanies authenticity. When we surrender the need for external validation, we begin the process of dismantling the filtering mechanism. We permit our thoughts to flow with greater freedom, our words to carry more genuine emotion, and our actions to be guided by our inner compass rather than the perceived expectations of others. This shift is transformative. It propels us from a state of perpetual anxiety and self-monitoring into one of fluid expression and authentic presence. By comprehending that the pressure to perform is frequently a subterfuge for our fear of inadequacy, we begin to perceive that true courage lies not in the eradication of pressure, but in the cultivation of an inner resilience rooted in authenticity. This resilience empowers us to shed our filters and embrace the raw, unedited flow of our natural abilities. The subsequent step, therefore, is to explore how this surrender, this shedding of filters, actively unlocks the potential for spontaneous expression, guiding us from the courage to be real to the practice of being real. 4. Thriving under scrutiny. There arrives a moment, does it not? A subtle tremor in the atmosphere, a perceptible alteration in the trajectory of another's gaze. And then it descends. The spotlight. Even within the hushed confines of a solitary chamber, amidst a select few, or when one believes oneself entirely unobserved, the sensation can manifest. It is the profound awareness of being beheld, and almost instantaneously, an internal metamorphosis occurs. This is the juncture at which our intrinsic sensors engage. It is akin to the flick of a switch. The unhindered current of one's thoughts, the natural cadence of one's discourse, the instinctive fluidity of one's gestures or expressions, all are momentarily arrested. Because the instant we perceive ourselves under examination, our minds enter a state of hypervigilance. We commence a litany of interrogations. Does this suffice? What impressions will be formed? Is this phrasing felicitous? Does my appearance meet approval? Is this the optimal approach? This internal interrogation, this self-imposed restraint, is what we term mental filtering. It represents our cognitive apparatus's attempt at safeguarding us, ensuring we avoid missteps, refrain from uttering improprieties, or appearing less than impeccable in the estimation of others. Reflect upon it. When engaged in uninhibited conversation, articulating a nascent idea, or pursuing a cherished activity without conscious deliberation, the experience is one of effortless grace. Thoughts arise and words follow, almost in perfect synchronicity. Yet, the instant the awareness of being observed intrudes, that velocity diminishes. The mind accelerates, attempting to anticipate every conceivable reaction, every potential judgment. It is akin to piloting a vehicle at maximum velocity while perpetually consulting the rear view and side mirrors, preoccupied with what lies behind and beside, rather than fixated on the path ahead. This incessant evaluation, this apprehension regarding the potential responses of others, constitutes the very essence of mental filtering. It is a bulwark, erected by the fear of censure, that impedes the unimpeded flow of our innate capabilities. This trepidation is profoundly human. From our earliest moments, we internalize the imperative of conformity, the significance of acceptance, and the necessity of averting disapproval for our very survival. Thus, when we sense ourselves under scrutiny, our primal circuitry is activated. We aspire to present an idealized rendition of ourselves, the persona we believe is desired. In this endeavor, however, we often obscure the genuine, inherently competent individual who already resides within. We become so engrossed in the performance, in the pursuit of some imagined benchmark, that we lose touch with our inherent rhythm. The pace of our articulation decelerates to a crawl, burdened by the weight of our internal critic and the specter of perceived external opinions. Yet, herein lies a quiet verity, a divergent perspective on this phenomenon of being observed. What if, rather than a threat, scrutiny could serve as a reflective surface? Not a caustic, condemnatory mirror, but one that merely reflects the present reality. When you experience that pressure, that palpable sense of being regarded. It is not an immutable indictment of error. It is a signal that your filters are operative. It illuminates precisely where you are self-impeding, where you persist in attempting to dictate outcomes, where apprehension of judgment holds sway. This pressure, however discomfiting, can indeed be a potent instrument. It compels us to confront the very fortifications we have erected around ourselves. It accentuates the chasm between our authentic, innate capacity and the meticulously constructed, filtered persona we project. In the absence of observation, these filters may lie dormant, their presence unobtrusive. But under scrutiny, they become starkly evident. They are the architects of our hesitation, the instigators of our second-guessing, the reason our words emerge with diminished alacrity or clarity. The key to flourishing under such attention is not to redouble efforts towards flawless execution. It is precisely the inverse. It is to relinquish control. Surrender signifies the abdication of the compulsion to impress. It entails the liberation from the dread of perceived imperfection. It involves the cessation of the relentless pursuit of external validation, that perpetual yearning for the imprimatur of others. When we surrender, we cultivate an expansive space. We cease attempting to contort our thoughts and actions into a preconceived mold of perceived acceptability, and instead, we permit our authentic selves to emerge. Consider a musician who has devoted countless hours to perfecting a piece. When they perform for an audience, if their focus remains incessantly on executing each note flawlessly, on the pronouncements of critics, their rendition will likely be stilted. But if they can surrender to the music, if they can place faith in their practice and allow the notes to flow organically, they forge a deeper connection with their audience. Their passion, their genuine ardor for the music, radiates. This is the transformative effect of surrendering to scrutiny. We cease striving to embody another or an idealized version of ourselves, and we simply are. And within that state of being, our natural faculties can manifest unimpeded, often with a velocity that astonishes even ourselves. It is facile to succumb to the fallacy that under scrutiny, one must attain flawlessness. Yet, this pursuit of perfection is precisely what impedes our progress and renders our expression artificial. When confronted with pressure, the aspiration for perfection becomes the antagonist of authenticity. It fuels our mental filters, inducing us to overanalyze every utterance, every gesture. We become so consumed by the fear of error that our performance ultimately falters, becoming less effective, less genuine than it would be if we simply aspired to good enough. What, in this context, does good enough signify? It denotes the articulation of what resonates as true for you in that precise moment, devoid of excessive refinement. It involves entrusting that your innate voice, your sincere thoughts, even if lacking external polish, possess inherent validity and worth. It is about permitting your mind and body to operate at their natural tempo, a tempo often exceeding the conscious, critical faculty's capacity to keep pace. When you embrace good enough, you circumvent the labyrinth of overthinking. You suspend the internal debate concerning perfection, and instead concentrate on conveying what you genuinely feel or comprehend. This facilitates a far swifter, more fluid mode of expression even when cognizant of being observed. Contemplate the simple act of responding to an inquiry. If you perceive yourself under scrutiny, your mind might traverse a dozen potential answers, weighing each for its sagacity, its wit, its courtesy, its capacity to impress. This process consumes time. You may even pause for an extended interval, appearing hesitant or uncertain. However, if you can embrace the concept of good enough, you might simply offer the first honest and unambiguous response that arises. It may not possess the utmost eloquence, but it will be genuine, and frequently, that authenticity proves far more potent and captivating than a meticulously crafted yet hollow rejoinder. This is the velocity of surrender in operation, permitting the natural, uninhibited current to supersede the filtered, perfected iteration. So, how do we effectuate this? How do we cultivate the practice of surrendering to scrutiny? It commences with awareness. The next instance you experience that familiar constriction, that urge to filter your thoughts, simply observe it. Refrain from self-condemnation. Merely acknowledge, my mental filters are engaged. Then, with gentle intentionality, endeavor to loosen their grip. One method involves reorienting your focus. Instead of fixating on the observing eyes, attempt to concentrate on the message you intend to impart, or the sentiment you wish to convey. If you are speaking, direct your attention to the idea itself. If you are performing, focus on the inherent joy of the action. This redirection of attention can serve to quiet the internal critic. Another practice entails consciously granting yourself license for imperfection. Articulate to yourself, it is permissible if this is not flawless. It is acceptable if I falter over a word. What matters is that I am expressing myself authentically. This straightforward act of self-compassion can profoundly alleviate pressure. It is akin to issuing yourself a permit for human fallibility. You may also experiment with visualization. Envision the scrutiny not as a harsh spotlight, but as a gentle, encouraging radiance. Imagine the observers not as arbiters, but as fellow travelers, keenly interested in what you have to share. This reframing can fundamentally alter your internal experience of being regarded. The fundamental principle underpinning it all is this: the velocity of surrender pertains to relinquishing the struggle against external observation. It involves recognizing that the pressure of being watched frequently activates our internal filters, precipitating overthinking and deceleration. By learning to perceive scrutiny not as a threat, but as a reflective surface, and by actively practicing surrender, releasing the imperative of perfection and the quest for external validation, we can transmute these moments from sources of anxiety into opportunities for genuine expression. We can permit our inherent abilities to flow, unhindered by self-judgment, and in doing so, not only perform with greater efficacy, but also live more fully, more courageously, and in greater harmony with our true selves. This is how we transition from being paralyzed by the gaze of others to truly flourishing under its influence. Conclusion: we commenced this exploration by confronting an apparent Everest of aspiration, the yearning for velocity, for unvarnished articulation, a desire, frequently met by an unseen yet formidable bulwark. This bulwark, as we have meticulously dissected, is our own mental filtering. You have undoubtedly experienced firsthand how the internal arbiter, the voice that questions, appraises, and refines, can incapacitate even the most innate aptitudes. This volume has illuminated a pathway, not through amplified exertion, but through a recalibrative form of engagement, the engagement of relinquishment. It speaks to discovering that exquisite equilibrium where our inherent gifts may cascade, unburdened by the incessant thrum of self-recrimination. At the core of this treatise resides the profound realization that mental filtering acts as the clandestine saboteur of our latent potential. It is the perpetual internal colloquy that interrogates: is this sufficient? Am I articulating the apposite sentiment? What will be the perception of others? This unremitting self-examination engenders a constriction, decelerating our cogitations, our utterances, our actions, and ultimately, our capacity for authentic self-expression. At its zenith, we pinpointed the instigators of this filtering: the dread of censure, the imperative to excel, the craving for external validation. These anxieties act as the fuel for the filtering mechanism, forging a cyclical reinforcement of self-doubt that suffocates spontaneity. The revelation of the speed of surrender is that the panacea for this suffocating mental filtering lies not in a more rigorous cognitive process, but in a profound act of capitulation. Surrender, within this context, signifies not abdication, but the cessation of the struggle against one's inherent trajectory. It entails loosening the reins of conscious dominion that the filtering apparatus so tenaciously grasps. When we surrender, we permit our natural proficiencies, honed through diligent practice and innate endowment, to manifest unimpeded. The tongue anticipates the conscious, filtering intellect. The creative impetus flows unmarred by the interruption of self-censorship. This is the crucible of peak spontaneous articulation. The insights gleaned from pushing the frontiers of rapid discourse are not circumscribed by the spoken word. This tenet of transcending mental filtering through surrender serves as a universal cipher. Contemplate the artist grappling with an unblemished canvas, the entrepreneur confronting an intricate predicament, or the individual navigating a delicate exchange. In each scenario, the identical internal filters, the apprehension of imperfection, the skepticism regarding one's own judgment, the disquietude concerning eventualities can precipitate inertia. By consciously electing to relinquish the compulsion for absolute command and the incessant filtering, we unlock a more fluid, intuitive, and potent operational paradigm. This is not an endorsement of temerity, it is an affirmation of trust in the deeper intelligence that resides within us, an intelligence that functions with optimal efficacy when liberated from the relentless barrage of self-condemnation. We observed how external pressures, the spotlight, the audience, the deadline exacerbate the urge to filter. Yet, it is precisely in these high-stakes junctures that surrender attains its greatest potency. It empowers us to access our most accomplished selves, not by intensifying efforts to orchestrate the performance, but by releasing control and allowing our practiced competencies to radiate, unencumbered by the cacophony of mental filtering. This principle is applicable to every domain wherein we aspire to express ourselves, from quotidian interactions to moments of significant creative output. The Odyssey does not conclude with the closing of this volume. The cultivation of surrender as a means to overcome mental filtering is a lifelong undertaking. It necessitates fostering an acute awareness of the filter's engagement, that subtle constrictive sensation in your chest, the rapid-fire thoughts, the impulse to second-guess. Upon perceiving these indicators, gently reorient yourself toward the principle of surrender. Each instance wherein you elect to disengage from the imperative to filter, you fortify your capacity for spontaneous expression. You construct resilience against self-doubt and nurture a profounder faith in your inherent capabilities. The resultant is not merely celerity, but a richer, more authentic, and more gratifying mode of existence within the world. It is about discovering that liberation which ensues when you cease striving to meticulously sculpt each thought and instead permit your genuine voice to emerge. Proceed forth, embrace the velocity of surrender, and unveil the profound emancipation of an unimpeded self, finally liberated from the manacles of mental filtering.